good evening and welcome to Agenda Awani. I'm Amrul Aiman, your host for tonight. So tonight we dive into a critical and complex issue at the intersection of technology, privacy and national security. So the Malaysian Communications and Multimedia Commissions, or MCMC, has proposed a new framework that would mandate the retention, preservation and disclosure of communication data for investigative purposes. Supporters say it could be a game changer in combating cyber threats, online scams and child exploitation, but critics are also sounding the alarms over privacy, surveillance and the potential misuse of personal data. So how do we strike the right balance in between public safety and also personal freedom? Joining me tonight to unpack this question is Professor Sureswaran Ramadass, Chairman of the APAC IPv6 Council and also a cybersecurity expert. Prof, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining us.
Good afternoon. Good evening, Amiru.
Okay. Prof, let's start with the big picture. In plain terms, what gap is this proposed data retention framework meant to close? And why can't our current laws or our industry practices handle that today?
Actually, our current laws do cover it. If you look at the CMA Act, it covers, in general, the entire scope of such data retention. However, it doesn't get into the specifics of it. So what this new framework is doing is, it takes that law and then it goes into detail to say exactly what do we need to cover within that framework. It's actually very interesting to see that that law was so well written that it had opened up the fact that such a thing could happen in the future. That act was in 1998, more than 25 years ago. But yet they had the far-sightedness to say, okay, in case of cybersecurity, we need to look at such issues. But they don't delve into the details. And the details have changed. As you know, the internet is an ever-evolving system. And the whole internet has changed. Today, those days, you won't have cyber crimes committed at the scale that is being committed today on the internet. You have maybe 1% of crime committed would be cybercrime, or even less. Today, if I'm not mistaken, the data shows that in 2024, 85% of our crimes are now cybercrime related. And so there comes a need for not just our government, but governments around the world have started to move to say we need to put in laws, we need to put in new frameworks to be able to effectively combat these particular issues that are arising.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned that it is an evolving nature. That's why we need this proposed data retention framework. But let's look at the worst case scenario. If we did nothing for the next 5 years per se, what's the worst case scenario here, Prof?
I have some data here, I'll explain this. So in 2024, 35,000 digital financial scam cases were reported. 35,000. This is a 33% increase from the previous year, 2023, which means it's increasing, right? Think what's going to happen in 2025. You're going to get probably 60,000. There's going to probably be 100% increase because people have realized that our laws are not really fully adequate to be able to combat such things right now. The current laws, I remember people getting arrested and then there's a 50,000 or 500,000 fine and then they're off. But they've cheated people for more than millions and millions of ringgit, right? And then there comes a question of data and whether the data is valid, was it captured correctly, and is it admissible in court and so on. So the prosecution teams, our law enforcement agencies are having a difficult time putting together such cases based on our current data retention capabilities framework, if you say so. So with a new framework like this, it's going to see a reduction in such crimes. We hope to see a reduction. I'm sure you've gotten one of those phone calls, right? It says, okay, I'm calling from EPF, please give me all your information. And then you hang up on them. But there are people out there, the older people, older generation, even some in the younger generation that get scammed and they're losing money. We need to do something about this. That's just one of the one of the issues we're having, but that is a definite, obvious issue that all of us have experienced.
Prof, I'm pretty sure this is what a question that has in everyone's mind right now. Paint us a scenario. How would a quick access to this data stop a fast-moving scam, a major cyber attack, or perhaps even a child exploitation ring?
So, if the data is looked at correctly and analyzed correctly, there is a possibility that we can be able to analyze the situation and say that yes, such a attack or such a offense is taking place or has taken place, and we are able to capture the track. We're able to capture it to who used it. I mean, that's the aim, right? To be able to find out who stole your money. If we can't find out who stole your money, if we cannot have that track, then we can't prosecute the person. It becomes useless. Second, if you do find out who stole it, but if you don't have the evidence to go to court and say, look, this is the track, this is the proof. You can see the transaction went from here to here, the communication happened from here to here. This person made the phone call, or this person sent that email. That proof must be there, that metadata proof, right? And that must be presented in the court. If you don't have that proof, but he stole your money, again, there is no case, or the case becomes a very difficult case to fight. This is what this framework can actually achieve, or we are hoping that it will achieve.
When MCMC proposed this, there's a confusion out there. So are we storing the content of calls and messages, or only the surrounding metadata, like who, when, and where, and why does the metadata matter so much to the investigation?
So this framework looks really at metadata. So metadata is not so much the content. It is the data that is associated with the message. The time that the message was sent, who was it sent by, which IP address, where was it routed to, and so on. So this metadata information is vital, because then it shows that that criminal sent the message trying to rob that old person, and convincing that old person to give the money or their banking information to them. So that is why that metadata is important, right? If you are talking about general data, I think the biggest collectors of general data is definitely not the government. It's your social media. On the social media sites are the ones that do a fantastic job in collecting people's data and storing the data.
And who exactly falls under this framework? Are we literally tracking everyone with a mobile device, kids, tourists, public figures, or whether they realize it or not, Prof?
I think for the beginning, what they're going to do is store all data. And then eventually, they're going to be applying techniques, filtering techniques, even maybe artificial intelligence, to start filtering the type of data that you want to keep. But for the beginning, it is possible that all forms or all people's data will be stored, all users' data.
Is there anyone perhaps that is explicitly exempt under the current draft?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure if anyone is currently exempt, but I think in the sense of mainly targeting the criminal element, that is what the whole act is about. The act is to really target the criminal element, the people that are communicating with the other people to get into your bank accounts and so on. They're putting one by one steps in place so that this is reduced. I think the people need to understand our community, and most of the community understands, because very often I'm in a group and then people say, what the hell is the government or the police doing about stopping these scam calls and this thieving of money from our accounts? It's continuously there. Everyone's asking about it, right? So it is important that this framework be initiated so that we can reduce that. It's really reached a point of annoyance. You really pity, someone who's 75 or 70 and their entire savings, EPF money gets stolen. And then what do they do? That was their savings for their life.
Yes, you laid out why is it important because of the growing online scams and all that. But also there are some people that argue that some of the information in place, the names, IPs, live locations, it feels a bit highly sensitive. So what's the real risk if it leaks? Because lately also we have received reports, at the time of recording, we have received reports of data leak within the government itself. And so what should MCMC treat as its top cybersecurity priority right now, Prof?
So if you ask me, and if I'm a cyber criminal and I'm looking to steal data, really this metadata is kind of useless for me. I mean, all it tells me is A communicated with B, B communicated with C. That's not going to get me money. If I'm a criminal, I will go after databases which are associated with banks, databases which are on social media. These databases give me a lot of information. Honestly, that's what I will go after, real information, because I can use that. I want names of people, bank accounts, I want information, phone numbers, I want things like a lot of information about a person. Metadata really doesn't give me that. Metadata gives me just who communicated with what at what time and so on. It's really something that is only useful for people who want to know who communicated when and what, that kind of information. So to me, if I'm a cyber criminal, I'll go after other sources of information, really. That's where my main goal is. That's where the goal of data is.
Also, Prof, MCMC also suggested a 12 to 18-month retention window. Does that strike the right balance between investigative need and also privacy, or could a shorter, say, 6-month window could still work?
To really be honest, to me, really it's not that big a deal whether you're 6 months of storing of metadata or 12 months or 18 months. When you store metadata, the biggest challenge will be on the people having to store it. They will have to provide the storage space for it. But otherwise, whether I keep 6 months of data or 2 years of data, it's metadata. It's only valuable to people who know how to use metadata.
Prof, if I could ask, how does this practice compare with other leading practices in the region itself?
So all countries are now practicing. All countries are moving towards securing their internet. And there are many, many countries, I can go through details. I have some statistics here. But, countries have put much more tighter provisioning than Malaysia has. So Singapore has started putting in very tight measures in their cybersecurity rules and regulations. The other countries, including Japan, Korea, the UK, Australia, all of them have tightened up their monitoring. The US has always had monitoring. The US requirements are even much, much higher than any of our requirements. In fact, the interesting thing about the US requirement is actually goes beyond the borders of their country. They are saying that any company that is registered in the US still has to adhere and give the US data. And they actually go beyond metadata. So, for them, they find that monitoring this they are mainly looking at terrorism as well, cyber terrorism and so on. So within Malaysia, if you look at the scope, what Malaysia is doing compared to what some of the other countries have implemented, yeah, actually pretty good. I mean, in the sense of we keep it to minimal, we keep it to a very targeted reason, to really assist law enforcement and nothing more. I mean, that's the real target of this particular thing.
Prof, this proposed, it will affect not just the big telcos, but also smaller non-licensees will also store the data. Do they have do they all have the infrastructure and the cyber hygiene to keep it safe? And how do we reassure the public on that their data is safe with also the small companies as well, then, other than the big telcos?
That's a good question that you put forth, and this is something that the smaller players have to have discussions with MCMC and the regulators who are now proposing this framework. So if they need assistance, they should be forthcoming and say, look, we need assistance in this particular areas, or can you help us audit our security or our cyber security where we are storing the data? So there are general guidelines. There are ISO guidelines like 17799, which is now taken over by ISO 27002. So these guidelines clearly tell you what to put into place in terms of cybersecurity. But physical audits are also important, and such audits, I think the players can always ask MCMC for assistance, the regulators for assistance in this.
Prof, you mentioned before that what we are collecting, what the MCMC is proposed to collect is metadata. It would not be misused. But in worst case scenario, let's talk if it's being misused. Which perhaps risk is the most realistic here? Is it perhaps rogue insiders, or maybe external hackers, or perhaps even loopholes in the legal process? And which one that might worry you the most?
As I said, I find that, to me, honestly, if I was a hacker, that data that they're collecting is kind of useless. But I would go after different sources where I would be, it's much more useful if I'm a hacker for me, right? And what are those sources? Those sources are things like bank accounts, credit card information. These are the people who store. A lot of social media, a lot of websites, sales sites store such data. Those are the ones that I will go after. If I'm going to put time and effort and I get metadata, what am I going to do with that, really? Unless I'm going to prosecute someone, or I'm going to go after someone to say, look, you created this line of communications, I'm blaming you for it. And then the guy will say, well, what do you want to blame me for? You know, you're not an enforcement agency. So you understand what I'm saying? In that sense, you know, the usefulness of that data, it all depends on what the person who's trying to get that data wants to achieve out of it.
Okay, Prof. If this moves forward, what concrete controls, perhaps in terms of technical or procedural, must be in place to keep, those curious staff or maybe overzealous officers from poking around where they shouldn't?
So there must be oversight. To anything we do and everything that the government does, there must be an oversight body. And from what I have read, the CMA already authorizes or looks into oversight by, there is an appeal tribunal as well as a judicial review process, which is embedded in the CMA Act of the 1998 law. And it allows people to say, look, if I feel that it is being abused, I can use that to review what is happening. And very important. So that's a good thing that you brought up. There must always be a watchdog. So maybe MCMC can look into setting up maybe a small watchdog committee that ensures that such data is never abused.
And also looking abroad, Prof, countries that you mentioned before with similar laws often built in redress mechanism for wrongful access or leaks, which protections actually work elsewhere, and should Malaysia adopt them wholesale or perhaps customize its own? Yeah.
And we should always look at what's the biggest issue with us. So we shouldn't adopt anything wholesale. We should take what they have, learn from what they have done, and then build it more towards our needs and build it better.
And then do you think people deserve to know if their data was accessed during an investigation, especially if they are later found innocent? And if so, when should that notification happen?
So this is metadata. That means if I'm to be notified that you're going to save my data for every call I make, imagine the amount of notifications I get. But your question was more specifically to if it is being used in an investigation. I really am not an expert to answer that question. It is more of a legal and police, I think a law enforcement thing. I don't know if law enforcement is required to tell someone that they are being investigated. If it is required, then they must tell the person. If today, if the moment the police start an investigation on a person, are they required to tell the person they're starting an investigation on you? If they are, then yes, then they must tell the person if they are extracting their data that yes, I am starting an investigation, I'm looking at your data. It must follow the bigger framework of the law.
And in your perspective, should MCMC or relevant agencies publish transparency reports showing how often their data is accessed and for what purpose, as is done in some other countries?
Why not? I mean, there's no harm in disclosing, right? Information to say how useful has this framework actually been. I think it'll help, for people to further support the framework to show that, look, with this framework now, we've managed to reduce scam calls by 80%. And that would make people happy and support the framework better.
And perhaps, Prof, if there's a breach or a wrongful disclosure, where should the buck stop? At the company or the regulator or individual employees? And what realistic recourse should ordinary citizens have?
So again, it depends. If I'm a person and I hacked one of the ISP site and I stole the metadata from there, then technically the ISP's security was lackadaisical and the ISP would have to be responsible to a certain degree. But as I mentioned earlier, the data that is taken is really of no use to a normal person or to a normal hacker. So minimal use. The damage that it can possibly cause is minimal. So a person can, if it has caused damage to the person, then he has that recourse, I think under Malaysian law, from what I know, to sue and say, look, by you allowing people to breach your data, I have lost X amount of dollars. You need to compensate me for that. So I do believe, and I do believe MCMC has such watchdogs in place where you can probably make the report to them and then they will have to take action against the ISP or the licensee and recover whatever losses that you have incurred because of that breach.
Prof, if you look at the talks between the people, trust in data handling is already fragile. Beyond legal safeguards, what visible steps could MCMC take? We convince Malaysians that this framework won't morph into unchecked surveillance.
It's a difficult question. I really don't even know how to answer that. But then, as I said, oversight, right? You need a watchdog. So that really becomes the role of the watchdog. And the watchdog can be within MCMC, or if they prefer it to be outside MCMC, it can be parked outside MCMC. But they are the ones that should be monitoring what is happening. And if something irregular happens, they need to raise the alarm. Mm-hmm. Yes, I think it's perfectly fine for the public to suggest that such a watchdog be established.
Mm-hmm. Prof, in the final minute, let's zoom out a bit. So is this framework truly granting new powers, or is it simply bringing our legal toolbox up to speed with the digital world that's already here?
If you're asking me my opinion, it is something that we really need to allow law enforcement officers to go after what is happening today. From what I see, the scams have gone beyond control today, and they are causing a lot of unhappiness and theft among our community. And it's amazing. even I can be scammed. The way they craft it is amazingly realistic, right? You get calls which you tend to respond to, and the people are being, you're basically being robbed, and then you go to the police station, you make a complaint. Even the police are stuck. What do they do, right? So I believe that having as much, giving the law enforcement as much mandate, as much support as they can to curb this is very important today. So if they feel that having this framework will help reduce and will help them bring such criminals to justice, then I strongly support this.
Okay. Professor, thank you for your insight. That was Professor Sureswaran Ramadass, Chairman of APAC IPv6 Council and cybersecurity expert, sharing his thoughts on the proposed data retention framework and what it could mean for digital privacy, national security and trust in our institutions. That's all for the episode on Agenda Awani. I'm Amrul Aiman. Thank you for watching and good night.